Move in close. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, to the members of the press, thank you so much. With so much going on today, that you have come to this press conference. I'm very appreciative because this is perhaps one of the most important subjects. Is this on? Well, what were you waiting on? Excuse me? All right, okay. It won't stay up. I thought perhaps she was telling me that I was not being heard, and so I had to stop. So I was just thanking you for being here at this press conference with so much going on today. But it is so important for us and for this nation that we talk about this crisis in America. It is a housing crisis. So, good afternoon, everyone. While I, committee Democrats, and over 30 of our nation's housing advocates stand here today in advance of tonight's State of the Union address to address the historic progress made under the Biden Harris administration, we're also gathered here to call on the president to put housing front and center in his agenda for the country's future. I want you to know, as of one of our meetings this morning, I did have confirmed that the president is going to have in the State of the Union address tonight an emphasis on housing. Give the president a big round of applause in advance. He answered our call. We sent the letter to the White House, and they are accommodating and they are participating. And you will hear from the president, among all of the things that he will be sharing information, he will be talking about housing. So, again, after I sent that request, we have gotten our answer. As a nation, we still have unfinished business with housing, the number one domestic issue. As I discussed with Fair Chair Powell at yesterday's monetary policy hearing, rising housing costs make up nearly 70% of core inflation, outpacing modest wage gains. This means that even as Americans are making more money, housing costs are so extreme that the extra money in their pockets just isn't enough. More families than ever before are paying well over 30, even 50% of their paycheck on housing. And a record 653,000 people are experiencing homelessness in the United States, as millions more are on the verge of homelessness themselves. So, what we're talking about is on the streets of America. In my own county, 71,000 people in LA County are on the streets every night. And nationally, this figure, 653,100, it continues to grow because people cannot keep up with the cost of rents. They certainly don't have down payments. We don't have enough Section 8, and so we have this housing crisis. This crisis is reaching families at nearly every income level and geography. These are indeed our neighbors, our family members, students, veterans, frontline workers, the elderly, and possibly many of us standing here today. As Ms. Margaret Eady stated about her family's homelessness experience in 2022, in that hearing, we held, and let me quote, being homeless steals your identity. People like my husband and I need stable housing before we can accomplish our full potential, quote unquote. Another witness, Mr. Jeffrey Williams, who is a husband and father to three young children, stated in 2020, quote, in our house, the rent eats first. We'd rather go hungry than risk being out on the streets, quote unquote. Ms. Fernando Galindo, who testified in 2021, shared a similar story and added, quote, I cannot even entertain the idea of saving money to buy a house one day, quote unquote. These are just a glimpse of the stories that people have the courage to tell at our hearings held by committee Democrats. So many others across the country go untold. And I want to be clear, our future does not have to be this way, and we know how to turn the tide. That's why We are also here today to call on Congress to come together to pass my legislative housing package to address this crisis head on. My committee has worked so hard, learned so much about housing, and we know what the needs are. We have put together three important bills. One is the Housing Crisis Response Act. The other is Ending Homelessness Act and the Down Payment Toward Equity Act. The federal housing budget represents, you'd be surprised, the federal housing budget represents less than 1% of all federal spending since 2019 and less than 2% since 1986. My bills would change that by making historic, equitable investments to help create nearly 1.4 million affordable, accessible, and resilient homes, reducing housing costs and ending homelessness, and revive the dream of home ownership for all. Now is the time to get it done. And so, in conclusion, I know that President Biden is just as committed to housing as committee Democrats and I are. And so I look forward to hearing him demonstrate to the American people that he is listening and will do everything he can to end our nation's affordable housing and homelessness crisis. Unfortunately, people living under bridges, in makeshift camps, out on the sidewalks, they won't hear this tonight. They won't see this tonight. They don't have television. They don't have radios. They don't have any way. But they sent us here to fight for them. For those people on the opposite side of the aisle who are not fighting for them, I want you to know that they have homelessness is all over America. I want you to know in rural America, people are living in shacks. And in all of these communities, people are trying to stay warm. They're trying to get out of the rain. Children are trying to go to school every day, living in automobiles at night. Makeshift RVs that are being sold for junkyards are being put on the street with no windows and no doors, where people are desperately trying to have some housing. And so we're serious about this. And we didn't just call on the White House to put this in the speech. If he had not put it in the speech, we would not be happy. And so it's in the speech. The State of the Union tonight, we're very proud of the president. We know that he means business, but we mean business too. And we're going to work very hard to make sure that we get rid of this crisis in America. Now I'm going to call on members of the committee. First, Representative Cleaver, would you step forward? Call on the next person after you.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. As a result of her persistence in keeping housing foremost coming into the White House, the President tonight will speak directly to the American people on the subject of housing. Now, we've made progress in terms of the deficits. We've made progress in trying to lower the cost for working families. We've made progress in the fight against corporate ripoffs. President Biden has been a Democratic champion who is leading the fight between competing versions of the country and competing forces in the battle for the very soul of America. And tonight, this very night, the President of the United States will lay out his vision for the future. I have one message for the President. It is the same message that I've delivered since my first visit to the White House after the President was elected. Housing first, housing foremost, housing fairness, housing focus, and any other F's that you could come up with is what we have to do in terms of getting this front and center on the agenda. Now, under the leadership of our soft-spoken chairwoman, I'm sorry. Everybody knows that that's not accurate. But under her leadership, we have advanced the housing crisis in terms of being ready for a housing crisis because we are right now living in a time where many families are teetering on the very edge of existence. If you don't have a house, Your somebodyness has been torn. If you don't have a house, you're not a part of the American dream. The dream is going on all around you. I know, I lived in a shack for 7 years. I know then that we moved into public housing. And when we moved into our own house, my father's somebodyness rose and he would walk and strut up the street. And if you throw a cigarette butt on the floor, you have to deal with my daddy because he knew that he had finally gotten a house. And he lived in it until he was 101 years old 2 months ago. A house is a somebodyness maker. And our chairwoman has pushed and pushed and pushed, and now the president is going to continue to push and push and push. I will tell you this. If we had passed Build Back Better, which our chairwoman had authored, ladies and gentlemen, we would have done housing all over this country, and we would be in the process of reducing it. And so I'm asking right now for everybody who understands somebodyness to talk about housing. Whatever you do, you get on the bus, tell the bus driver, housing. Anywhere you go, this is the issue that we've got to face and face it frontally. Thank you very kindly.
Would you announce the next person, Mr. Sherman?
Now I want to introduce one of our colleagues on the committee, Mr. Sherman from California.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. And it's been a pleasure to serve for 28 years on the Financial Services Committee, of course, under the leadership of Maxine Waters. I think that future Chair Waters and future Subcommittee Chair Cleaver have outlined why it's so important that we move bills on housing, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the President will devote a chunk of his speech to housing. I think he's heard from Maxine Waters. In addition, I don't really have much more to add on the legislation and the speech, but I do want to mention one other thing. We need to start lowering interest rates. We need to build more apartments. The number one factor in whether apartments get built, whether they're government subsidized or low-income housing or entirely private sector, is what is the interest rates. The rents are too damn high. That's because we don't have enough units. And second, we need to lower interest rates because that mortgage payment eats first, as Maxine pointed out in her example. People have, and in this effort to lower prices, which is good, they haven't lowered the cost of living because the cost of living includes your mortgage payment. It includes your home equity line. And yet the measures of inflation that we use, like the CPI, don't. So we need to see lower interest rates so that people can build apartments and people can aspire to become homeowners. Thank you. And now we'll move on to my friend from Texas, Al Green. Or we'll move on to my friend from Nevada, Steve Horsford.
Thank you. I'm Congressman Stephen Horsford. I represent Nevada's 4th Congressional District and currently serve as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. I want to thank Chairwoman Maxine Waters for her tireless advocacy in prioritizing housing, housing for all, housing that's affordable, housing that's accessible, and for leading the charge in helping to make sure President Biden centers the issue of housing in his State of the Union address. It's because of your leadership that last Congress, when we were in the majority as Democrats, this committee made housing a focus. Unfortunately, Republicans have failed in their responsibility to prioritize housing, and because of it, the housing crisis has worsened, and we're here to say that the American people deserve to live in affordable, accessible housing for everyone, and that is our priority. I want to thank the chairwoman because she's already mapped out the plan, and the plan includes passing the Housing Crisis Response Act, providing $150 billion in fair and affordable housing investments. She has called for the passage of the Ending Homelessness Act, which would end homelessness and significantly reduce poverty across our nation and in my district. She has proposed the Down Payment Towards Equity Act, which would directly assist first-time, first-generation home buyers in purchasing their first home. We know that home ownership is also about building equity. And so as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, I'm very focused on closing the racial gap, the racial wealth gap in America. And one of the ways we can do that is by making housing and home ownership a greater priority. I also want to say that I represent a district where parts of my district are now owned, 1 in 3 homes are owned by out-of-state corporate speculators. Companies that are coming in, buying these homes in cash, pricing out veterans, pricing out first-time home buyers, pricing out families to live the American dream. That's why I introduced the HOME Act to crack down on these corporate speculators, to give HUD the enforcement tools that they need to go after market manipulation, to find these corporate speculators, and to take those fines and to put them into the Housing Trust Fund for more affordable housing. These are the solutions that we have as Democrats, that we're pushing the administration to advance, and we're calling on Republicans to put people over politics and to put housing first on the agenda. That's why we're here. Thank you for the leadership of our chair, and I want to turn it over to Representative Tlaib from Michigan.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for the incredible leadership. As you heard from many of my colleagues, we are facing a housing crisis in our country, and it's been here for over a decade now. I know in Michigan we lost more Black home ownership than any other state in the country, and it is a continued priority. The first time I ever heard our chairwoman, sorry, I still call you our chairwoman, Maxine Waters talk about housing was once in caucus as we were talking about infrastructure, water infrastructure, all these different infrastructure. She got up. She didn't even have to go to the mic. And she said, housing is infrastructure. So don't forget housing. I remember that moment, and ever since then, I have always been able to say, housing is infrastructure. I want you all to know today the average renter now pays over 30% of their income on rent. In Metro Detroit alone, there are 3 extremely low-income renter households for each unit that is both affordable and available. Yet nationwide, less than 1/4 of households that qualify for rental aid actually receive assistance. Our public housing stock faces roughly a $70 billion need right now of repairs. Detroit Housing Commission, right here in my backyard, for example, needs hundreds of millions of dollars in capital improvements, but they have only been able to get $12 million annually to spend. In response to this insufficient federal support, of course, I introduced the Public Housing for 21st Century Act to ensure that public developers have access to the latest best practices using local policy tools and financing. Now, when discussing our housing crisis, young adults are often left out of the conversation, yet each year over 3.5 million young adults experience homelessness. Unhoused young people face many unique challenges like a lack of credit history, but in Metro Detroit and elsewhere, relatively few services are designed to really meet their needs. And that's why, again, I've been leading this movement around Youth Homelessness Guaranteed Income Pilot Program Act, which would provide direct cash assistance to young people experiencing homelessness, and then study the effects of the program on housing and other outcomes. I know in the richest country on earth, we have resources to ensure that everyone has safe and dignified home. We must pass the progressive policies like Representative Waters' Housing Crisis Response Act. We can solve this crisis if we act with urgency of this moment. So again, I cannot thank Congresswoman Maxine Waters for her incredible leadership on this. From the beginning, I don't care if it's from ending homelessness, talking about this issue. And at one point, you might think it's only California, but she knows this is a national crisis, and she has not ever once let up in requiring us to move again with urgency. Next, I'm going to have Representative Garcia. See here, Representative Williams, Nickel. Yep.
Thanks so much. Folks, Today, the eyes of the nation are on the United States Congress, and one thing is crystal clear. House Republicans are totally incapable of governing, and another thing that's equally clear is they have absolutely no plan for housing. They have done virtually nothing in the House Financial Services Committee to address the important needs for housing we have in this country. Again, I'm Wiley Nickel. I represent North Carolina's 13th district, where housing is one of the top priorities for the people I serve in Congress. It's great to be here alongside Ranking Member Waters, Housing Subcommittee Ranking Member Cleaver, and fellow House Financial Service Committee Democrats, ahead of President Biden's State of the Union address this evening, in which affordable housing will be a priority. I'm looking forward to hearing what President Biden has to say. Right now, though, there are 343,000 households in North Carolina that spend over half of their monthly income on rent, leaving little to no for money for other expenses like healthcare, transportation, and nutritious food. Access to safe and affordable housing is essential to the well-being of working families and individuals in North Carolina and throughout the country. That's why Financial Service Committee Democrats are working to increase the supply of affordable housing and to lower the cost of living for working families. We are putting people over politics for initiatives like low-income housing tax credit, the home investment program, the self-help and assisted home ownership opportunity program, the public housing fund, and Section 202 housing and rental assistance. We're also working to pass common sense legislation like Ranking Member Waters' Down Payment Toward Equity Act to help address racial wealth and home ownership gaps by providing $100 billion in direct assistance to help first-generation homebuyers purchase their slice of the American dream, their first home. We're going to continue to put forward common sense ideas and solutions to build more affordable housing, increase affordable housing access, and tackle this housing crisis. Now, I'm very glad to turn it over to my friend, colleague, Congresswoman Brittany Pettersen from the great state of Colorado.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. My name's Brittany Pettersen, and I represent Colorado's 7th Congressional District. I got involved in politics. I never planned on working on housing policy. I got involved 16 years ago and was elected to the legislature for 10 years. On my journey in the legislature, I focused on our public education system and our public health system. And when I was running for Congress this last election, and I was visiting places across my district, it's a 4.5-hour drive from the suburbs in Colorado all throughout rural Colorado, I heard number one, the top thing that came up anywhere that I visited was housing. Colorado is the best place to live, and our secret's out. We have people that have been moving there in the thousands for years. We do not have the housing supply to keep up with this. In our rural communities, we have people who have lived there their entire lives, who have seen the home values increase threefold in just 2 years during the pandemic because of the ability to work remotely and people coming to those communities. They're being pushed out from the places they've lived their whole lives, the place that they want to live with their families. And I've heard from businesses that are unable to actually hire the workforce and keep workers in their communities because they can't afford a place to live. This is a crisis. And I came to Congress as a freshman with high hopes of our ability to come together to work on this critical issue. I'm so excited. I was very excited to be on the Housing Subcommittee, which is why I wanted to be on Financial Services. And it's been incredibly disappointing, not just from the dysfunction that we've seen in Washington and the inability to do the basic function of our job, like fund the government and pass a budget. We have been unable to come together on one of the most critical issues that intersects with every single thing that we care about on housing. And so I'm proud to stand with the Democrats who are here on my committee with thoughtful, comprehensive proposals on how we need to increase our housing supply. When I think about what this means to me personally, my mom struggled with a substance use disorder issue, and because of her lack of income, the only reason that she wasn't homeless and that she was able to survive is because she was one of the few people who qualified for Section 8. My dad, who was homeless for 3 years, living in motels and on couches, and my aunt, who unfortunately died on the streets without access to the care that she needed and the shelter that she needed. We spend so much more on the back end when we don't help people who are desperate, get them access to the mental health services, the substance use disorder, treatment and recovery services, and transitional housing, helping our seniors actually have a place where they can downsize and move so that it brings room for the next generation of home ownership. This is critical for long-term wealth and success and stability. So I want you to know that Democrats are united fighting on a package with the leadership of Chairwoman Waters to actually bring the comprehensive change we need. And I'm grateful that President Biden has also prioritized this, that he is going to be focused on that tonight, and that he is leading, but he needs Congress to lead. With that, I'm going to pass it to Sarah Sardian from the National Low Income Housing Coalition.
Before Sarah comes up, let me help you to understand that we're not in this struggle alone, despite the fact we have too many members on the opposite side of the aisle who don't pay attention. We have housing advocates. We have housing nonprofits who do nothing but focus on this housing issue. They lobby, they organize, they have press conferences, they go into communities, and they stand with us. Without them, we couldn't even get this far. I am so pleased and I am so proud that Sarah is going to be with us today. Sant Eamon, who is one of the leaders on the housing issues of this country.
Thank you so much. So sweet of you. Appreciate that. Hi, I'm here today on behalf of the National Low Income Housing Coalition to urge President Biden to use his State of the Union address to call for the large-scale investments that are needed to address America's affordable housing and homelessness crisis. Across the nation, 10 million of the lowest income households are paying half of their very limited incomes on rent. Rents are sky high, eviction filings are up, and homelessness has increased to its highest level on record. Major legislation has been introduced by Representative Waters and others here today that directly addresses the root causes of the housing crisis. By creating universal rental assistance, the Ending Homelessness Act bridges the gap between what people earn and what their housing costs. With $150 billion in investments in housing solutions like public housing and the National Housing Trust Fund, the Housing Crisis Response Act increases the supply of housing, particularly housing that's affordable to people with the lowest incomes. We know what solutions are needed to end America's housing crisis, but we need the political will to invest in those solutions at scale. And so I urge President Biden to use his State of the Union address to join us in building that political will for the large-scale solutions that are needed. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nikitra Bailey from the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Okay, the Fair Housing Alliance. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Waters and your colleagues, for the opportunity to stand with you today. Housing plays a pivotal role in shaping the lives of every individual. The availability of fair and affordable housing is not just a basic need. It is the cornerstone which individuals need to thrive. Housing impacts every aspect of a person's life, and where you live absolutely matters. We know that our schools and things like clean air and water are impacted by housing. We know that job opportunities are impacted by housing. And yet, sadly, the skyrocketing cost of housing remains a significant driver of inflation. And I have to pause here because the data told us that it would not be until the end of 2024 that we would start to see rent subside. So had we passed the housing provisions in the Build Back Better Act, millions of families across our nation would have received relief for their skyrocketing housing costs. And that's why it's very important that we need Congress to pass a budget with support for local fair housing enforcement and other equitable housing solutions, and comprehensive legislation with funding for things like the Down Payment Toward Equity Act. And I want to go into details on the Down Payment Toward Equity Act. We know that in communities like Charlotte, North Carolina, and other places across our nation, investors have been scooping in and buying up all of the affordable housing stock. With the Down Payment Toward Equity Act, 5 million additional homeowners would qualify and be able to afford a house. And they would get into homeownership in rural communities and urban communities throughout our country. And we would do what the Congress did with the passage of the Homeowners Assistance Fund in the American Rescue Plan. We would respond in the way that the American people need us to. During the American Rescue Plan's Homeowners Assistance Fund, we were able to keep over 400,000 homeowners safely housed during this pandemic. So when Congress acts, we get the relief that we need. So we add our voice to the chorus of voices today, calling for measures that will ensure equitable housing opportunity so that all of us can have a chance to thrive. Thank you again.
Wow. Thank you so very much. Do we have other housing advocates groups represented here today? Come quickly and tell them who you are. I want everybody to know that we have a lot of others. Just, please announce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Allie Solis. I'm here on behalf of Rock USA, as well as the Community Preservation Corporation, and we're just so thrilled to be partnering with the ranking member and the members of this committee to make sure housing becomes a national priority.
Thank you. Who else is here?
National Adapt.
Okay, go right ahead.
Hi, my name is Rhoda Gibson. I'm with National Adapt, and just quickly, we have been working with Maxine Waters, Representative Maxine Waters, since 2018, and she has graciously been working with us to get the bill basically supports disabled people in an unprecedented way. And it's
Habitat for Humanity of Greater Los Angeles and Habitat for Humanity International, and we welcome and we appreciate the champion that we have in Ranking Member Waters for supporting affordable homeownership.
Thank you so much. I have one last speaker who had not anticipated being here because of who he is, what he cares about. He could not help but join. He's been talking with me every day when he sees me about housing. I know him. I've known him since he was born. This is the son of the Reverend Jesse Jackson, whom I've worked with for so many years for poor people everywhere. Jonathan Jackson, Congressman.
Thank you, Congresswoman Waters. I would like to be affiliated with all the remarks that were shared here earlier today, and I'd also like to give a very special thank you to Congressman Waters for keeping this administration accountable. When we say a housing crisis, we're talking about a senior crisis. When we say a housing crisis, we're talking about a family crisis. When we say a housing crisis, we're talking about a child care crisis. Every human being deserves to have a home. Maxine Waters, Congresswoman, thank you for championing this cause, and thank you for the relief that you have brought about for thousands in the Chicagoland area and millions across this country. We need to pass this bill. It's the solution to our problem. Thank you, Congresswoman.
You're so welcome. Now, members of the press, I think you heard everything, but if you have any questions, we'll take them now. Yes. Speak up.
Have you had any conversations with your Senate colleagues there, Brown, about any way that your package can come together with something that
Sherrod is a leader on housing. He is one that works with me. I work with him. He's with us all the way. We can count on him. We wish they all were like him. And let me just say this, because this is not normally said. You kept hearing references to what happened to our big bill on Build Back Better. That is the bill that now has been broken up into 3 bills. We lost that on the Senate side. We lost it because Manchin and Sinema opposed it and didn't vote with us. I'm calling names.
Also, before you leave the mic, on the minibus that you all voted on and passed yesterday, there were some increases in some housing provisions on Section 8, rental assistance program, homeless assistance grants, public housing fund. Can you speak about how important it was, given the threats of the cuts and given that other non-defense discretionary programs were cut?
A little bit better than status quo. That's what we got. and we're pleased about that. It's not enough. We cannot be satisfied. We're thankful, but we cannot be satisfied. We want to end homelessness. We want to have fair down payments for young people and first generation. We want to expand Section 8. We've got to do something real about the crisis. We're thankful for that, but it's a little bit better than status quo. Yes, yes, Ms. Politico. Yes.
What do you see as the biggest obstacle to passing something on housing this year?
The biggest obstacle are the Republicans. They do not support housing. They do not support funding. As a matter of fact, some of the things they have done have caused cuts. But what they won't talk about is the fact that they have homelessness in their communities. Many of them who represent rural areas, they have people who are living in dire poverty. They have people who are living in shacks, barely have water, running water, etc. We want people to know that when they're supporting their congresspeople, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they've got to talk about this issue. You've got to ask them about this issue. And for those poor people in rural communities who have representatives who don't even call the name of their city or their town, never talk about them, never advocate for them, now it's time for you to speak up, because we want to end this crisis. Those of us who are fighting, we intend to win, but we sure could use a little help. Thank you all so very much for being here today. Thank you everybody. Let's go to it and let's listen for what the president is going to say tonight about housing.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
So hey, I just wanted to point out, so like the bill goes.
I'm so sorry, Diane.
But again, the new one that we have, the first line of defense is housing but some programs, some really important programs, this crisis.